Hey, I'd like to welcome you to another episode of Mission Matters. My name is Adam Torres, and if you'd like to apply to be a guest in the show, just head on over to missionmatters.com and click on Be Our Guest to apply. All right, so today's guest is Dr. Tom Cowan, and he's an author, speaker, and influencer over at Dr. Tom Cowan, LLC. Tom, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Adam. Good to meet you.
All right, so we got a lot to talk about today. I want to get into your work. I want to get into how you got started and a whole lot more. But just to get us kicked off, we'll start this episode the way that we start them all, with what we like to call our Mission Matters Minute. So, Tom, at Mission Matters, our aim and our goal is to amplify stories for entrepreneurs, executives, and experts. That's our mission. Tom, what mission matters to you?
It's a good question. I think right now my mission is I see that we're living in a culture where people are basically scientifically illiterate, including the doctors and scientists, or so-called scientists. And my mission is to try to help them understand how to think logically, rationally, and scientifically.
Yeah. It's great. It's great having you on the show. And before we get into your work, maybe talk a little bit more about your background and how you got started, maybe in medicine.
So, sort of usual upbringing with the idea that I should be a doctor. A lot of people, my family knew my father and grandfather were dentists. I didn't really like it, so I tried to joined the Peace Corps and taught gardening. I learned there that there was another way to be a doctor than what I had learned. So that allowed me to go into medicine. And then I did some family medicine and worked in emergency room. And basically my whole career, I tried to figure out what I learned and in medicine was actually true and what was just a story that is not true.
Yeah.
So I wrote a bunch of books on that. The heart doesn't pump the blood. Blocked arteries don't cause heart attacks. Cancer has nothing to do with genetics. Vaccines are neither safe nor effective. And then viruses aren't real, and on and on.
Did you always have that curiosity from like a younger age? I'm always like, did you have that curiosity in you, would you say, about how the world worked or otherwise?
Yep. I never believed in what I was told. I don't know why.
Yeah.
My mother used to remark on that a lot, and I don't know where that came from. I actually think it's an interesting thing.
Yeah.
I heard this from Mr. Rogers once, because I actually had a difficult time with my father, which means that I didn't believe in authority, right? He's the authority figure in my life. And I had all these doctors in my life who were authority figures, and I didn't believe what they were saying. And so I learned at an early age that authority isn't what it was cracked up to be.
Yeah. So when you were going through like your studies and like things like that at school, especially in your advanced education, that had to be a little tricky, right? Like you're reading things, and do you have like that extra layer in your mind or something that's like, okay, I hear this, but is this true? Like, do you have that?
I did. And I went through medical school essentially telling them the right answers, but not. So they would say, so what's the treatment for strep throat? And I would say PenVK 250 QID for 10 days. That's it. And they would say, you don't seem very enthusiastic about that. And I would say, that's the right answer. You asked me a question, I gave you the answer. That's all I needed to do.
So it was obviously that's the recall memory and all the other things that you're able to do to figure out what they had there. When did that?
I was good in school.
Yeah. Well, obviously to do the work and to crank out the books and to do everything else you're doing. I didn't think that you had any problem with that. I was just curious about the way that you think, because especially as we go further into like the topic and what you propose in your work, I feel like that had to have been a theme throughout. And so I'm curious if it was kind of a buildup, or was there a moment when you decided, I have to do something about this? I have to, because you're really, and I'm using these words, not you, so correct me if you would propose it differently. But from my vantage point, it's like you're on a crusade to really educate people about a lot of maybe miseducation or things or concepts that they feel are true that may not be true. Like, was there a moment, or was that like a progression? Like how did that, was there a tipping point? Like, help me there.
Yeah, I don't know that there was a tipping point. It was always something I was interested in. But
Hmm.
the real turning point for me came when I started to understand that, and this I actually heard about later, is a kind of Hindu spiritual path,
Hmm.
which I didn't know about.
Yeah.
That you don't have to worry about what is true, just focus on what isn't true.
Hmm.
And when
Hold
I
on,
really
let me feel that a
understood,
second. I've never heard that. So could you say that one more time? I want to really hear that, what you just said, please.
yeah, and I can give you an example.
Yeah.
So I decided, and actually, interestingly, when I decided to go to medical school, I read
Mhm.
all the works of Sherlock Holmes.
Hmm.
And this is what he did. He
Yeah.
said, just look at the facts and throw out what isn't true, and what you'll be left with must be the truth.
Hmm.
And so let me give you an example of how, and that is the essence of scientific thinking.
Mm-hmm.
If something can't be falsified, it's a belief system.
Mm-hmm.
And so science is the process of investigating claims, not debating which theory is correct.
Mm-hmm.
So let me give you an example so your listeners.
So
I'll
I'll
say,
understand too. Go ahead.
yeah. So I'll say there's no evidence that viruses have been shown to exist,
Mm-hmm.
right? So the claim is chickenpox is certain illness
Mm-hmm.
caused by a thing called a virus, right? That's the
Mm-hmm.
claim. I say, prove to me that there is a virus. Now,
Mm.
most doctors, most people, most scientists will respond to that by saying, so what causes chickenpox?
Yeah.
And it's like, here's the example. Guy's 18, he's Asian, his parents are Caucasian. He
Mm-hmm.
always wondered about that. Then he rummages through his parents' closet, he finds adoption papers.
Mm.
He goes to his parents, says, are you, I just found out I was adopted. Is it true? Yes, it's true. We didn't wait to tell you, etc. So it's very clear he was adopted. Goes to his
Yes.
best friend. He says, yeah, I just found out I was adopted. I'm a little shook up. His friend
Mm-hmm.
says, so who are your real parents? He
Mm.
says, I don't know. I just found out as he says, until you tell me who your real parents are, I don't believe you were adopted.
Mm.
That is ridiculous.
Mm.
That's so tell me what causes chickenpox.
Yeah. Yeah.
COVID, there's no evidence there's a virus called SARS-CoV-2,
Mm.
period. So instead of saying, okay, let's look at the evidence, right? That's the
Mm-hmm.
issue. They say, so what causes COVID or what causes
Yeah. Yeah.
chickenpox, et cetera? In other words, who are your real parents?
Mm-hmm.
And I can tell you, once I got the hang of thinking like that, then I could really think and
Mm.
really understand the heart does not pump the blood,
Mm-hmm.
period. I didn't know what moves the blood at that point, but I knew that there's no way the heart could pump the blood.
Mm.
Everybody thinks the heart pumps the blood, the cardiologist, the internist, the scientist, total nonsense, easy to
Mm.
prove. And eventually, then, if you're willing to stay in that unknowing phase,
Mm-hmm.
right? You just, like there's a sort of fear or where
Yeah.
am I or what's right or how does the world work? You
Mm-hmm.
just stay there. Then you start learning actually how it does work.
Mm.
But if you can't stay in that sort of cognitive dissonance,
Mm.
then you never learn anything. And once I got the hang of that, then I could figure these things out.
And so how do ideas, let's just, I mean, pick one of them, like the chicken pots, let's say. Like how do those ideas carry on? Like, is it a marketing campaign? Is it just people generally accept it? So then like how do you think those things get like planted and then they just become, I won't say common knowledge, but accepted?
Well, you have to go back and say, how did they, you see, here's the problem and why I
Mm-hmm.
say, unfortunately, what I learned is that the doctors and scientists are scientifically illiterate. I
Mm.
go back and say, oh, okay, let's start at the beginning, right?
Yeah.
Let's start with the question, do sick people make well people sick?
Mm-hmm.
Right? That's
Mm-hmm.
behind chickenpox, the flu, etc.
Yeah.
So so here's the first thing. If you get sick and then somebody else gets sick, in other words, and I can ask you this question, is
Yeah.
it true that if 2 or more people have the same symptoms at the same time in the same place, that means somebody caught something from somebody else? Is that
Mm.
true?
Mm. Yeah, it could be. Yes. From a
It could
person
be, but
or
is it necessarily true?
no, not necessarily. Yeah.
Because, like, you put 10 rats in a basement and
Hmm.
then you put rat poison, and the
Yeah.
next day, all 10 rats bleed to death, same symptoms, same time, same place,
Mm.
but clearly they didn't catch it from somebody, another rat,
Exactly. Yeah.
right?
Hmm.
Here's my point. You can't tell by observation
Mm.
whether there was something passed from one person to another, just
Hmm.
like the rats, right?
Yeah.
So you have to do an experiment with
Hmm.
controls. You have to put 10 people with chicken pox with 10 children who don't have chicken pox
Hmm.
and put them in the same room, et cetera, and then put 10 people who don't have, et cetera.
Yeah.
So me and my friends have looked at the entire medical literature for the last 150 years.
Wow.
There is not one scientific paper that demonstrates using true science that sick people make well people sick. And there's
Mm.
at least 200 studies that show that doesn't happen.
Mm.
Now,
How did how does that
anybody,
happen?
let me just say one thing.
Yeah.
Anybody who says, oh, that can't be because I got
Hmm.
sick from Uncle Harry and et cetera.
Sure.
No, show me the paper that shows it. We've asked hundreds of scientists. Nobody can come up with a paper.
Mm.
So why do they believe it?
Yeah. That's the way to say it. Like, how does this happen? Like, why do they like? Is it like layers of, let's just say, work being done on layers of work, and you accept the previous work, and then they didn't go far enough
Yeah,
back to like actually question the original like thesis or question like you just did? Like,
right. I mean, so here's another one.
yeah,
Everybody knows about polio. They say, ah, we
mhm,
got rid of polio. It's infectious disease
yeah,
caused by a virus and it's spread from one person to the next. There's
mhm,
about 50 papers showing there's no transmission of polio from one person to another. So
mm,
I asked doctors and scientists, what was the paper that showed that polio was caused by a transmissible agent?
yeah,
They don't know.
yeah,
But I know they took a child who died. This is 1908. Took a
mhm,
child who died of polio, took his spine,
mhm,
ground it up in a blender, injected into the brain of 2 monkeys. Didn't inject saline or milk or anything else. One monkey died. One monkey got paralyzed. They say that proves polio is caused by a transmissible virus.
wow.
Now that's ridiculous,
And that's
right?
the accepted like thing, and it's from 1908.
1908. Ever
That is
since
still time.
then,
Yeah.
it's the fact, dogma. Polio, they say polio has been proved there's a virus. Then,
Mm,
if you say, okay, can you show me the virus? They'll take the ground up spine
mhm,
and show you these pictures on the electron microscope.
mhm,
But then there's at least 10 papers in the medical literature of taking ground up spine
mhm.
from people who don't have polio, doing the same process, exact same pictures,
Yeah.
proving that those pictures are just what happens when you grind up spine and stain it and freeze it and dehydrate it,
Yeah.
proving, right? They
Yeah.
did that with HIV. They took the T lymphocytes, that's
Mhm,
the white blood cells that are infected, so-called,
mhm,
with this HIV, this virus.
mhm,
They ground it up, got the proteins from it, 28 proteins, right?
mhm,
So those are the HIV proteins.
mhm,
Then they did somebody who had T lymphocytes who couldn't possibly have AIDS,
mhm,
got the same proteins.
mm,
That proves there is no thing that's different in that lymphocyte
mhm,
from a person with AIDS versus a person not.
mm.
But here's the problem. And to answer your question,
Yeah.
doctors, they don't know those studies. I
Mm.
didn't know those. Nobody ever told me, go
Yeah.
look into it. Go
Mhm.
find out the original paper. They just said, this is a fact. Boom.
Yeah.
Use these drugs. It'll kill the HIV. Nobody rose their hand. Hey, can you tell me how there was an HIV discovered?
Yeah.
Nobody knew that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, but it's not just viruses. You've heard of like autoimmune disease, right?
Mm-hmm.
Caused by your immune system, your antibodies
Mm-hmm.
killing your body, right? You would think there's at least one paper in the medical literature where
Mm-hmm.
somebody took antibodies, right? That's
Mm-hmm.
the causative agent, injected those into a normal person or animal, and showed it caused disease,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
That's how you would show it. You know how many papers there are that show that?
Hmm.
0.
Interesting.
And if you don't believe me, anybody listening out there, send me the paper,
Yeah.
and I'll tell you why doesn't show that.
So, Tom, one of the things that's just extremely fascinating to me about this is, obviously the facts that you're mentioning, but like if there's not a paper, there's not a paper. Like you can't refute that. Like what you just like as using your logic, you can't refute this. There's not in terms of there's not if there's not a paper, there's not something proving it,
There's not a
then,
paper.
or show you. So in my mind, I know that you're a hand raiser from the standpoint of not everybody's going to come do an interview and be and go counter to what is generally accepted. But what I'm really curious about is, and I guess you could put, and I don't mean it doesn't have to be about the individual per se, because I'm not asking you that, because I know you don't know them, and some of these might be, very old, right? But I'm just talking about the individuals as a whole. How, like, these papers that are disproving something, even if we were just to pull one of them that you mentioned, the polio thing, or the polio paper, and all of those papers that disprove what became commonly accepted, accepted knowledge, I'll say, for most, like there's people behind that. Like, how do the people behind who disprove something, like, how do they deal with that? They're like, wait a minute, this isn't right. Everybody thinks that, but it's not right, because they obviously know the opposite is true, because they're the ones doing the research, and it's not like they're in a bubble. You know what I mean? They're fighting for their ideas, I would imagine, and they're disproving. Like, what happens to those people?
So let me give you an example.
Mm-hmm.
So here we are, early 1950s.
Yeah.
Nobody had, they now have an electron microscope so they can,
Mm-hmm.
quote, see viruses.
Yeah.
But they admitted they could never see a virus in any sick person. Not in chickenpox, not in rabies, not smallpox.
Yeah.
They said that. So they said, we got to figure out another way to, quote, isolate or find a virus. Okay?
Yeah.
So now a guy named John Franklin Enders came up with a way. Here's what he did. He took a child with measles. He took snot from their nose. He didn't purify it, didn't filter it, didn't do anything. He put that on growing cell culture, like monkey kidney cells. And then he added antibiotics, which are poisonous to kidneys. He added trypsin, a chemical. He added fetal bovine serum, which is blood sucked out of the heart of a cow, and a few other chemicals. And then 3 or 4 days later, the cells died in the culture. And he said that proves the existence of the virus in the snot. And so here's what's really key, because to answer your question, he did the whole thing again, but he didn't add any snot. He just did the bovine and the trypsin. And you know what happened? He said it broke down identically to the first.
Wow.
Now, that means that there was nothing in the snot that broke down. It was either the antibiotics or whatever, right?
Something else.
That's what he said. I can show it to you, the quote in the paper.
Yeah.
But somehow that became the way that we isolate, i.e. find viruses. And he was given a Nobel Prize in medicine.
But it didn't work. So how does that happen?
He said, well, you
give him a prize? I don't know.
he was, because they then, to this day, every single virus that has been found has been using that Enders technique. Even though we've proven there's, at least we did the experiment ourselves. We did the whole thing without adding anything from a person even. Now, why did Enders end up saying this is the way that proves it when he clearly knew that it didn't?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
He got a Nobel Prize.
And then all the people like the Nobel Prize Committee, the this, the that. I mean, now that we're talking about like that level, there's hundreds of people. There's also a scientific community that, like what you just said, a layman who's, me. I'm not a scientist. Like I can understand that. Like
you
I
can
can't
understand it.
Yeah.
And we can show you 10 papers that were done in the next 5 or so years that repeated his experiment, right? Because they said, this is bullshit,
Yeah.
like he just proved this isn't work.
Yeah.
And they published it. And
so those 10 people or 10 teams, let's say 10 teams, like what happens to them? How does that get like just not remembered?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it's remembered by people like me and 12 of my friends.
Can I give you? I'll give you my theory, because this is one of the things that I was.
I don't know.
I'm going to give you my theory because and this is there's no paper on this, and you can prove me wrong. It's fine. I'm okay with it. But this is my theory, and I think it's thematic across many things across our society. And what it comes down to is if we're going back far enough, the media channels were always held there was very limited amount of media channels. So they were always held in a small handful of people, whether it's networks, whether it's whatever it is, doesn't matter. Now with social media, with a little bit more of this democratizing of platforms, like even this, like a podcast, like if somebody was to do that exact experiment that you're talking about, and if they were to come on to even a channel like this on YouTube, and if they were to propose something as simple as what you just mentioned, like that somebody won a Nobel Prize for, that one had snot, one didn't, both had the same result, but obviously the snot was the one that caused but it's like, then a YouTube viewer would literally that video, if it had any reach, would have so many comments in the comment section saying, did anybody watch this video? This makes no sense. What are you talking about? Not just from the scientific community, but from anybody could understand what you just said.
Yeah.
So the democratizing of these channels, of being able to like put out different types of content about it and otherwise, I think that is going to, I'm not just talking about scientific process. I'm not that versed in it, to be just quite frank, but in a lot of different ideas and concepts that are out, I would feel like it'd get harder. Who knows? That's just my thought. I'm like, and that's just from my side of the brain, like, because otherwise to me, it doesn't make sense. So there's 10 papers right after that say this is BS. And there's probably, you give me the number, I don't know, at least 10 teams working on this, I'm guessing. And all of those are disproving it, but yet they go forward and people just start accepting it.
And it became the way that we isolate and prove viruses. So here's another, this is something I can't prove, so it's not science, but here's my take on why this is happening.
Please.
So I'm going to tell you.
I gave you mine. I was like, yeah, I want yours because you've obviously been thinking about this longer than me. Go ahead.
So I have this cat. I didn't used to like animals, but I moved to this place and somebody gave me a cat, and then the cat crawled into my heart, right?
Yeah.
So his name is Pumpkin. So Pumpkin comes in and out, and there's woods and bears and coyotes and all kinds of hawks and mice. So whenever he goes out, he sits on the deck, and he looks around and he sniffs the air and he wiggles his ears back and forth and he wags his tail, which I think he's sensing the world before he decides where to go, right? And then he's I think looking for danger and looking for food, right? Now, imagine you told Pumpkin and he believed you, Pumpkin, there's a danger out there and it could kill you or do you great harm, but you can't see it, you can't smell it, you can't sense it, you can't taste it. You don't know whether it's there or not. What would Pumpkin do?
Not going out.
You're not going out. Hiding under the bed.
Yeah.
Trying to smell whether or sniff or sense
Mm.
what this thing is, but he couldn't do it, right? Because
Mhm.
he has no sensory experience. Next thing you know, he's not going out, he's not eating, he's getting sick. His
Mhm.
cat friends say, "You see, that thing you can't smell is that's getting you.
Yeah.
The thing is getting you." So everything in Pumpkin's life is now based on fear,
Mm.
right?
Yeah.
And he's very easily controllable
Mm.
because he doesn't know from his own experience
Mhm.
what the danger is, where his food is. He stops eating. He goes
Mm.
to experts to tell him what's wrong because he doesn't have any sense.
Mm.
And I'm here to tell anybody listening, if you believe in viruses and a whole lot of other things,
Mhm.
you're like Pumpkin under the bed.
Yeah.
And that's why when they tell you to go home and wear a mask and
Mhm.
inject poison into your arm
Yeah.
and close your business and don't see your friends and don't have fun and don't make money and don't do
Mm.
this, you do it because it's all based on fear. And if you're interested in controlling a population,
Mm.
that's the way to do it. It's all
Mm.
about fear. And
So what I
it's
was
always
talking
got
ab
to be something that Pumpkin he can't assess
yeah.
himself,
Mm.
just
And so
like a
what I was
virus.
talking about in the media and the distribution, that's probably a little bit more on the sliver of the control mechanism.
Right.
And in the past the control mechanism was held in a very small group of
Yeah.
hands. So
Yes.
that, and especially if we're going back to 1908, right, like that's, and then and you give somebody an award, and that's like the stamp right there. Especially
Right.
you give them the reward, then then it's too much at risk to go the other way.
Right.
I get it.
And there's a lot at risk for these people because if
Yeah, their
you're a
careers.
virologist and that's all you know in life, and this guy proves to you, it's like I think it was Upton Sinclair
Mhm.
said, never try to convince somebody they're wrong about something who makes their living believing the opposite.
Oh man, you're full of these, Tom. This is good. I like it.
And it's true
It
because
is, yeah, that makes sense.
imagine a virologist going in, head of virology
I
boss.
don't think this thing exists.
Yeah, I don't think this is all BS. You
But
go,
you've
great, you're
spent
fired.
your entire life on it, and oh my gosh, yeah, yeah.
And you go home to your wife and say, well, how was your day at work? Yeah, I
Well,
told the boss the whole thing is bullshit and he fired me. So how are you
and
going to pay for my Ferrari then?
at one point in time, you have to imagine there was, like, this happened. So at one point in time, there was some guy whose job it was to prove that the world was flat, and that's what he went around preaching about and talking about and mapping out. And when that concept changed, like, that would have been the guy that was stuck, if depending on his age, right? Depending on his age. It's
Yeah.
similar. It's
So we
it's an
have,
out there example, but depending on his age, right?
yeah, I mean, we have all these doctors who are, $300,000 in debt.
Hmm.
They can't start their own practice because they can't make any money. They don't know
Yeah.
enough to do it. They have to work for a hospital or some big
Hmm.
health firm. And if they don't do the protocols, they're
Yeah.
out. And
Yeah.
how are they going to live? How are they going to pay their debts? And so it's all this unseen fear, right? If you don't
Mm.
do what you're told. Now, I never worked for anybody. I
Mhm.
started my own thing because I didn't believe, I was going to figure it out for myself.
Mm.
And so I never had all those pressures. And
Mm.
anyways, I often joke that I tried to not tell the truth once, and I got so confused by what I was saying that I didn't know what I was talking about. And I thought, I'm never going to do that again.
Oh, well, Tom, man, this has been a lot of fun, and I learned a lot, and I learned a lot about different ways to think, and also I know there's a whole lot more in your books. So you have one now, The Truth About Contagion. You also have it, which is a free resource, and then you have your books as well. The Truth About Contagion: Exploring Theories on How Disease Spreads, and I know you have more books out, actually. That being said, how do people follow up? How do they follow your work? How do they connect? Like, how do they continue to educate themselves and go further than this conversation took them?
So we have the main website is drtomcowan.com, and
Mhm.
we have a clinic where our doctors who are neurologists and plastic surgeon and psychiatrists and
Mm-hmm.
general medicine. We treat people based on reality,
Yeah.
not on theories that are actually disproven.
Mm.
And every week I do a webinar and talk
Mm-hmm.
about viruses. Yesterday, I went through the proof that we don't breathe oxygen from the air. That's a myth, easily proven. And so I just go through one thing after another with medicine and some other things. What is real? Because you can't make a healthy life or a healthy society based on lies.
It's great. And leave that website one more time so people can go.
drtomcowan.com.
Fantastic. And for everybody listening, just so you know, we're gonna we'll put the website in the show notes and all that good stuff, so you can just click on it and head right on over. And speaking of the listeners, if this is your first time with Mission Matters and you haven't done it yet, hit that subscribe or follow button. This is a daily show. Each and every day, we're bringing you new content, new ideas, and hopefully new inspiration to help you along the way on your path as well. So again, hit that subscribe or follow. And Tom, really appreciate you coming on and taking some time for us. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Adam.